Hi there. If you've clicked onto this video, then I'm willing to bet that you are interested in managing debts in a different way. From reducing them to eliminating them entirely, I'm sure you are keen to know how you can actually get rid of the damn burden of debts so that you can actually move on and do better things in life, right? Well, my aim with this video is to show you that debt is an illusion, and with all illusions, they can be shattered completely when we are shown alternative information. So let's explore this together and see what we can do to move through these burdens in a different way, shall we? Firstly, before we begin, I do want to cover something that is critical, and that is this statistic from the Money and Mental Health Policy Institute that suggests that over 420,000 people in problem debt consider taking their own life in England each year. This is a devastating statistic and shows us the true impact that debts have on people and their mental health. Considering what we will be exploring and the illusion of debts altogether, this is not something that people should be considering taking their life over. Life has value, and debts are not at par value to that at all. The fact that people consider and actually do take their life because of debts and because they don't see a way out is exactly why this video needs to reach as many people as possible so that they are actually equipped with knowledge to help them. And because of this, if you see the value of this video, then please do share it with your friends, your family, your co-workers, anyone who will also benefit from this information. And if you can also consider liking this video too, then this does help the channel grow and reach more people, so we will appreciate this very much, and I thank you in advance for that. So the first thing to know is that debt has been weaponized against the people. It has been turned into a weapon because the more people can actually become wrapped up in debt, the more fear they will be in. If you think about it, when you are in debt to someone else, then you are essentially at their mercy. At any point, they could take you to court, take your stuff away from you, take you to prison even. This is because you owe them, right? So until you give them what you owe, then they own you, your labor, your property, all that you have basically, until they get what they are owed or what they think they are owed anyway. My aim is to help you see how debt is an illusion, with illusion just meaning something that is not really what it seems to be. Our five senses are constantly playing tricks on us. When they pick up sensory stimuli, and then how we actually process the stimuli will determine our perception of the stimuli itself. But what if our five senses are being tricked in such a way so that you cannot see the truth about debt that is right in front of you? Debt is an illusion because it is not what it appears to be, which naturally means there is something else going on and there is a way out. Where there is a will, there is a way. So if your will is to not experience the burden of debt, then you are in the right place. The first thing you really need to grasp, and you need to get this deeply in your bones, is that debt is an illusion entirely. So let's get into all the detail. The currency is debt-based. So since the abandonment of the gold standard in the UK in 1931, there is no asset backing the currency any longer. We have actually gone over this in loads of detail in the Truths You Haven't Been Told About Trust series, which I also recommend as a complementary series to this current video. The currency of your national bank is debt-based, since it is no longer redeemable for gold. It is only redeemable for more debt-based currency. So essentially, it is a debt backed by more debt backed by more debt, and more on top of that, to the point where you cannot even imagine the layers of debt that is really going on. This has had the effect of completely unbalancing everything, but especially the accounting ledger. You may wonder, how is this even proven? Well, just think about the national debt and how this keeps increasing no matter how many more taxes or fines or levies are introduced to raise more revenue. There is just no sign of stopping the national debt from increasing even more. You may be familiar with the quote, "balance is key." Well, this is because so many things in life appear to us as a duality or an opposite, such as light and dark, tall and short, night and day, and also paradoxes, such as less is more and that the most certain constant in the world is change. But essentially, these all interact to a balance of some sort, because a balance or a dynamic equilibrium is what nature does best. But when you look at artificial things, it is most likely that they do not follow this natural pattern of balance. And one great example of this, and the most impactful one, is the currency. If we have a debt-based currency that is not redeemable for any other asset, as the Bank of England state themselves, then how do we go about bringing balance to this? How can we actually balance the books? If you listen to our mini-series called Are You a Banker? And also the You're a Banker, Here's the Proof video, you will already know that by law, we are all considered to be doing banking business. And what do bankers do? Well, they balance the books. They keep strict accounting ledgers. They make sure that the assets and the liabilities match up. Well, how can any banker, including you, balance the books with a debt-based currency? We are all acting as if the currency is at times a positive, so an asset, and other times a negative, so a liability. Sometimes it's a debit, other times it's a credit, all for the purpose of accounting and balancing out the ledger. When we are talking about double entry bookkeeping, that is. But the thing that doesn't quite add up is that the currency itself is debt-based. So it is only ever a negative or a minus value because it is only ever a liability backed by more minuses and more liabilities. So why is it that we treat it as a positive or an asset, and other times we treat it as a negative or a liability when it is only ever a negative, only a minus, only a liability? Something cannot function as two things at once. The currency is either a positive asset or a negative liability. It cannot be both at the same time whenever we want it to be. That's like saying light can be dark sometimes and dark can be light other times, which we know is not possible. Light is light, dark is dark. So, when we are dealing with the national currency, we are dealing with an accounting ledger. Pretty much all accounting ledgers are set up in this way, where you have the minuses, so the liabilities, to the left-hand side, and the pluses, so the assets, on the right-hand side. So we can see that the liability side is what you owe to others, and the asset side is what you have or what others owe to you. With double entry bookkeeping, these two sides must always balance out to zero because they need to show the movement of value from one place to another. Now, let's see this in action when we use an asset to buy something versus when we use a liability. So, this lady that you see on the screen now, she has 4 gold coins. She would like to buy an apple, and she finds one in her favorite farm shop that costs exactly 4 gold coins. Perfect, she thought, because she has exactly 4 gold coins. So in this transaction with the farm shop staff, the accounting ledger will look like this. On the left side, so the liability side, taking the apple means that the lady now has a liability to the farm shop of 4 coins. So this is a minus to her. On the right-hand side, the asset side, she has her 4 gold coins which are firmly in her hand, so she can do whatever she likes with them. Now, because she wants the apple and the apple costs 4 gold coins, she will hand over the 4 gold coins to the farm shop staff to complete the transaction, right? And in doing so, the ledger is now balanced. The liability and the asset have cancelled out to 0. So the lady that bought the apple, she started off with 4 gold coins, and now she has an apple of the same value. The farm shop on the other side, they started with an apple worth 4 gold coins and finished the transaction with 4 gold coins. The exchange was fair for everyone because real tangible value has flowed between the parties. So you can see the lady started the transaction with 4 gold coins. She then exchanged them for an apple worth 4 gold coins. The transaction has ended with full settlement because it has balanced out to 0. Now let's do that all again, but with a subtle difference. Now imagine the same lady, but instead of the 4 gold coins that she had before in her hand, she now actually has a £5 note. And now she would like to buy an apple again, but the apple this time is worth £5. Now, this lady is pretty clever because she remembers that the £5 note is actually a promissory note, which is in reality a liability of the Bank of England, the Central Bank of England where she lives, and where the Great British Pound is the accepted national currency. She knows that this note, since the abandonment of the gold standard in 1931, cannot actually be redeemed for gold anymore, or any other asset for that matter. So now, when she goes to buy the apple, when she goes to complete the transaction, which she's going to complete using the £5 note, which is in fact a liability, so it is a debt instrument, one that is not backed by any asset anymore, so it is entirely a liability that we treat as if it is an asset, only because by law it was given legal tender status. So she uses this £5 note to get the apple that has the value of £5. So she owes the farm shop £5, that's her liability since she wants the apple, but she uses a debt instrument, a liability of the Bank of England, not backed by any asset whatsoever, to pay the liability that she has incurred. When we actually look at the transaction total, she has tried to settle a liability, so the £5 she owes the farm shop for the value of the apple, she has tried to settle this with a debt instrument created by the Bank of England. So mathematically, how this actually goes is the liability to the farm shop is actually worth -5, and the lady has given a liability debt instrument worth -5 to cancel out the liability to the farm shop to 0. But actually, when you have a minus value and you add another minus value to it, well, it becomes even more of a negative value. So in this example, -5 minus 5 becomes -10. The ledger is even further from being balanced. So this lady had a £5 note, which in reality is a -5 note because it is a debt instrument. She then exchanged it for an apple worth £5, which again, as it is using the national currency, which is debt-based, this actually becomes a -£5. Well, you can see that we are only dealing with minus numbers no matter what. But the thing is, the note the lady used, well, this is a liability of the Bank of England, which has actually been given legal tender status. meaning that you can use it for payments even though no asset has actually been handed to balance out the books. The legal tender status literally means that this lady, she cannot be sued by the farm shop, even though in reality, she did not hand over any tangible asset in exchange for the tangible asset that she got in return, which was the apple. You can hopefully get the idea that she hasn't actually paid for the apple, even though the farm shop is basically forced to accept this as real payment. What the lady actually did, well, she just discharged the debt, meaning she passed the debt on to someone else, with that someone else ultimately being the state or the government who are the ones managing the national debt, who will probably ultimately use this as an excuse to bring in more taxes to cover the so-called debt, even though they know that as long as the currency remains debt-based, there is absolutely no amount of taxes raised in the debt-based currency that could ever decrease the national debt. It really does make you wonder, why do we even have taxes, right? Seeing as not even those can actually be paid and the national debt cannot be decreased with more debt instruments. It almost seems as if taxes are tactically made to essentially keep people as poor as possible so that they are easier to control. Just a thought there. Anyway, back to the lady. She did not settle the debt, so she didn't balance it out to zero. She simply did not pay. She just legally stole the apple, basically, because the farm shop is legally not allowed to pursue her for the non-payment, even though she just didn't pay. Remember, it's not mathematically possible. So hopefully this has shown you that when you get through the illusion of debt, is that all of the national currency, all it is a liability of your central bank. Since the abandonment of the gold standard, the currency has no asset involved in the equation at all. The ledger is going to continue to become more and more unbalanced into the minuses perpetually unless something changes regarding the asset backing of the currency, which, let's be honest, is very unlikely. You now know that no matter how much we pretend otherwise, the currency is, as it stands, a perpetual liability. There is just no getting around it that mathematically it is impossible to pay when you are using a debt-based currency. The debt-based currency is debt-based because it is a promise of payment that is unfulfilled by the very people that made the promise in the first place. This is why, to get around this, they had to give this debt-based currency legal tender status so that people wouldn't be suing each other left, right, and centre, or even trying to sue the Bank of England, the government, the state, or even the Crown, because all these entities have basically failed in their side of their promise. Just because the currency has legal tender status does not mean that they can get away scot-free. Definitely not, because equity will not allow this to happen. So we've established that when the national currency is at play, you do not pay for anything because you cannot pay a debt with more debt. So by this very fact, you cannot fulfill any of your personal obligations that are actually in the national currency, meaning that you are essentially bankrupted just like your country has been bankrupted since they abandoned the gold standard. So from one angle, yeah, you are bankrupted because you can only discharge debts, but you can't actually settle them, so you can't bring them to a zero. But from another angle, the gold that used to back our currency, well, that asset still exists physically. It didn't just vanish. In fact, quite the opposite. It is still an asset that you have a right to. It is property that belongs to the people. Each individual has a right to it. So once you know this information fully, you can actually begin to use equity and trust law to help you move differently through these debt obligations that you thought you had. Now, I mentioned that the government, they passed law to abandon the gold standard, right? So, in effect, meaning that the gold that people once had the right to redeem their notes for, well, they no longer had the right to redeem them for gold. So, from one day to the next, they were basically stolen from, but in a legal way. The question is, who gave the state or the government the right to take away your right to redeem your notes for gold? Who gave them the right to take the gold from the people? Well, the answer is there is no pre-existing right or law that gave the state or the government the right to pass law that allowed the central bank to no longer fulfill their promise. This was entirely an ultra vires act from the get-go, because they never actually had the authority to do this in the first place. So this means that this wrong, well, it was enabled by the state, which means they have to be the ones to provide the remedy. The remedy is that in law, by operation of law, so not because of anyone's specific intention, but because the law imposes these duties to remedy a wrong. So by operation of law, the gold that still physically exists is held by the state or the government agents under a constructive trust, which is imposed by equity. And this trust exists for the benefit of each individual man or woman that makes up the collective idea of the people. This is even supported by a few maxims of equity that are actually perfect for the situation. For example, where there is a right, there is a remedy. So we all individually have a right to the gold, and therefore being deprived of it means that we have to have remedy for this. The next maxim is that equity acts in personam, which in this situation imposes duties onto the actual agents of the state or the government to act for your best interests. So it isn't even just about the gold as the res of this constructive trust. It's also about how these agents act towards you. And lastly, equity looks on substance rather than form, because, well, equity cares about the tangible asset, the gold, rather than the form, which is the Bank of England notes that are not backed by any asset, but instead are evidences of a perpetual liability. So since the abandonment of the gold standard and the fallout from this, it means that obligations that you have regarding payment in the national currency, well, these in reality, they can only be truly settled through the mechanism of a trust. So essentially, by moving titles in trust, by expressing the state or the government agents as the trustees of the physical gold still in existence, and yourself as the beneficiary. You see, trustees are the ones who are liable to make payments or disbursements out of the trust funds, right? And beneficiaries, well, they're only there just to have a good time, essentially. Whoever has the gold, the true asset, they are the ones liable to make payments because they actually have an asset that can actually be used to settle debts. In doing this, what are you actually doing? Well, you are removing personal liability from you, because no longer are you being presumed as the trustee in bankruptcy, but instead you are passing this title to the true trustees in bankruptcy, the state or the government agents. So what I have told you is true for all transactions that use the national currency as the accepted payment method, whether this is expressly or implicitly. But in some circumstances, you will not be able to use this information to rid yourself of personal liability to actually make disbursements out of your private funds. Take private agreements, for example, with your friends and family, where maybe you borrowed £20 from someone, and if you do not pay them back with another £20 note, then they would actually suffer a loss of £20 because of you directly. Well, in this kind of example, this information would not apply. This information really is to be reserved for dealings with the state or the government and any of their departments and their agents. You know, the ones who actually have caused these problems in the first place. And the ones who are holding on to the gold for the benefit of the people? Of course, if only the people actually came forward and started to do something about this. Okay, so this presentation has seen us getting into the weaponization and the illusion of debt, how the currency remains debt-based since the abandonment of the gold standard in 1931 in the UK, the impact that this has had on the balancing of the accounting ledger. We have discussed how the law that was passed to allow this abandonment of the gold standard was and continues to be an ultra vires act, which requires remedy to correct. And we have discussed how the remedy lies in equity and trust law, which removes personal liability from you, meaning that the debt is not yours as you may think, hence why it was always an illusion. So, if you're in debt, I hope this information will help you view that debt in a different way, a way that can inspire you to get creative with how you actually deal with it moving forwards. If you found this video useful, then do leave a like, share the video with your loved ones, and please do consider subscribing for even more content just like this one. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Until then, see ya!